This is
RedPubPod. RedPubPod.
Furniture History Edition, a podcast
RedPubPod.
from Redhawk Publications.
RedPubPod. RedPubPod.
RedPubPod. RedPubPod.
Welcome to RedPubPod. I'm Richard Eller. Probably the greatest employer to Western North Carolina is the furniture industry. Has been for 150 years and will continue to be substantial into the future. As a matter of fact, it's the industry that put Western North Carolina on the map. And uncountless thousands of people have worked within the furniture industry. Redhawk Publications is just getting ready to publish a book on that called Well Crafted, The History of the Western North Carolina Furniture Industry. And while I was working on that book, I was able to meet a lot of people that were instrumental to the furniture industry. None more so than a family that involved both a mother and a son who worked in the furniture industry. And I was lucky enough to interview Ruth Church back in 2022, I think it was. Mm-hmm. Since then, she's left us. But she left a great legacy because she told me some really good stories about the furniture industry. And I have with me today her son, Romey Church. Welcome to RedPubPod. Your mother was quite a character, wasn't she?
She was.
Tell me about her.
Well, she was quite a lady. She worked in furniture probably 25 years or so. I really don't know exactly how long. She loved life. She loved her family. Very, very active when she was younger, before her later years. Liked music, liked cooking, liked cats. She was a fun person and said a lot of funny things over the years that she really didn't think was funny, but she said a lot of funny things.
Yeah, she was probably the most lively woman I have met in the process. Now, she started in the furniture business at a very young age, right?
At 16 years old.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And there's kind of this iconic picture of her looking back at the camera while she's nailing the backs in on, was it nightstands?
I really don't know. She always said, I'm setting nails in backs. I don't know if it was a nightstand, if it was something bigger. I really don't know. But it could have been nightstand.
Any idea how she got into the business?
Her dad worked there at that same factory, Kent Coffee. And when she got old enough, 16 years old, I guess that was the age they would hire someone, she went to work. She had left school, and she went to work to help support the family, but to have spending money of her own. She didn't. She liked buying things, so she did it for herself and to help support the family.
At 16, let's see, I think it was 1942, wasn't it?
44.
44. Okay. So she was there during the war years.
Yes.
She was talking about several of those guys that really helped her in terms of learning the ropes on the job, right? She mentioned a few of those, I remember.
She did, and I cannot remember their names right now.
Yeah, me either.
But she did mention going to work there. People helped her. At some point, they came to her and asked her would she want to work a little overtime cleaning up some offices. She did some of that. She rode to work at part of this time when she was working there. Her dad actually didn't work there, and so she walked down the road a pretty good distance and then rode to work with a neighbor, and that's how she got started there. Okay.
What's your first memory of her going? She was still working in the furniture business when you were a kid, right?
She stopped at some point. Her and my dad got married in 1947. So she either stopped when they got married or she stopped when my oldest brother was born, which is the following year, 1948. I don't know for sure, but I know she stopped at some point there. She started back working either when I was very young or maybe before I was born. I think I was very young, but she started back. She was in textiles for a little while. The textiles moved away, and then she went back to furniture in the early or mid-'70s. She worked in furniture till the early 90s.
Is that when she retired?
That's when she retired, yeah.
Okay. Now tell me about her humor.
One thing she would say, this may not be a nice story.
That's okay.
There was a lady in the family, and she didn't like this lady very much, and this lady didn't like Mom very much. And so Mom was getting on up in years. She didn't have the full dementia, but she's older. And she said, I'd like to see this lady. I won't call her name. I'd like to see this lady, and I wish she had a spider on her head. What do you mean you wish she had a spider on her head? She said, well, I'd just take something. I'd just hit that spider, and if she said anything, I'd just say I was trying to kill that spider.
Kind of a roundabout way.
Yeah. So she wanted to hit this lady, but she kind of wanted to look innocent about the whole thing.
She needed an excuse.
Yeah.
How did you get involved in furniture?
Right out of high school, actually, I interviewed to go to work at that same factory. It was Singer Plant 1 then. They had some layoffs immediately after I interviewed, so I didn't go to work there. I worked at a campground for about a year, and then the campground didn't pay very well. So in about 1986, I started at Singer Plant 4, and I worked there for about 7 years.
I guess some of that humor that your mom had rubbed off on you, right?
I think so.
Because your time was marked, and this is in the book, by some interesting pranks that went on while you were at Singer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was young, had a lot of energy. Most of the guys I worked with were older, did not have a lot of energy, and it was good to have a little fun, kind of break the boredom, and I had a lot of fun at others' expense, but nothing too terrible. So you want to go into some of those?
Sure,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Those are a hallmark of that chapter in the book. I jammed as many of them in there as I could because each one of them, there's kind of a theme to them. And you're right, they're very harmless pranks, but they're a lot of fun. And I guess they speak to the issue that in the factory, if you were thinking about things, you had a lot of extra time.
Right.
It could be a boring job.
Exactly. Kind of repetitive, and there, you're right. There was plenty of time to think about different things, and you're right.
Okay.
Right.
So what's one of these where you got it over on somebody?
Okay. Well, there was this guy that worked across the other side of the building over there. I could see him coming, and for years, he had brought a little can of Beanie Weenies 2 or 3 times a week, and he would bring them over to near where I worked. He would set them up on this pipe, and this pipe was really hot, like 600-800 degrees. So he would open them a little, set them on this pipe, and he would warm his Beanie Weenies up. And he would come over there about 10 minutes early. Didn't take long. It was really hot. So I got the idea I would just remove those one day. So I could see him coming over there. He couldn't really see me. He'd bring his Beanie Weenies over there, set them on this pipe, and then as soon as he would round the corner, I'd take him and set him off over here or set him up in the window. It's wintertime. Set him up in the window. So he came back, and I see him coming. I set him up there just, 30 seconds before he rounded the corner. He'd pick up his Beanie Weenies, and they weren't hot that day. So he kind of shakes them around, and he goes on. So the next day he comes back a little earlier. So he sets his Beanie Weenies up there. And so, of course, I get them, set them up in the window, in it's wintertime, but they're just getting colder and colder. So he comes back, comes back around. I set them up there just in time for him not to see me. He picks them up. Gosh, they're cold again today. Puts his hand, don't touch the pipe. Puts his hand, this heat's just radiating off this thing. You can see the wheels turning in his head. He just don't know what's happening here. These beans are ice cold, pipe's hot. So he comes a little earlier, and I do the same thing. So we keep this up. So he's coming over almost 45 minutes earlier. I mean, he comes a little earlier every day to heat these beans, and they never get hot. They just get colder and colder and colder. And the only way he caught me is I just could not contain my laughter anymore when he would pick these things up. And he just could not figure this out. So he finally caught me, so that joke was up. But that lasted several days, maybe a couple weeks.
That speaks to the fun that I think people had to kind of make for themselves.
Yeah.
In the factory. Now, there was another story about a water cooler, right?
Yeah, the water fountain. There were these guys that worked behind me. There were about 8 or 10 of them back here in this area. So they installed them a water fountain back there along the wall, and they put the water supply for that was on a platform overhead. And so I found that supply, and it had a cutoff valve. So I could go up there, and those guys, I could see them go to the water fountain. They really couldn't see me. So these guys would go back to the water fountain, and they would press the button. The water would come up, and as soon as they'd lean over to get a drink, I just cut the water off. And so, they would raise up and they'd do the button again a couple times, and if water's coming up, they'd lean over again, and just as soon as they'd lean over, I'd cut the water off again. So we'd do that. We would do that, 4 or 5 times and go on. And so the next guy would go back there the next day, and we did this over and over and over, and again, till I couldn't contain my laughter anymore is the only way I got caught up there on that platform and turning the water off.
What was the reaction when they found out they'd been had like that?
Well, they'd get a little upset, maybe say a few mean things, but it never, they didn't hold a grudge. They knew it was all in fun, so I didn't make any permanent enemies at all.
Okay.
So,
did you ever get pranked like that?
No, I was too young and quick back then, and those guys were too old and slow, so they had no interest in trying, so never.
Okay. Tell me about your job. What were you doing at Singer when you had this mentally free time to come up with these things?
At this time, I was loading a hot press, gluing veneer fronts and backs on cores, and we'd load this thing up. I had a partner, a guy on the other side, and he would cover for me a little bit because he enjoyed watching me do this stuff. So, but you'd load this thing up, and it would cycle, sometimes pretty short, sometimes pretty long. So that left me a lot of free time to roam about, the immediate area there. So,
now, did your mom ever say anything about you getting into furniture? Was she for it, against it, didn't care? What was her reaction?
She kind of took it like a lot of people there in Caldwell County. That's basically what a lot of people do, and it's kind of the back in those days. That's where inevitably where a lot of people are going to end up. You're going to end up working in the shop,
mm-hmm.
and like you said, thousands of people did it, and most everybody did a little of it at least. Some people longer than others.
Mm-hmm.
But no real reaction on her part.
Now, were you caught up in that? I think it's 1996 or so layoff that Singer had.
No, I had moved on by that time. I
Okay.
was not working in furniture anymore.
What made you decide to get out?
I didn't like it as good as Mom did. I did not care for it. The money was not really good. I found a different factory, but in the telecommunications, and better pay, better working conditions, more stable, definitely than furniture, the ups and downs, being laid off.
Yeah.
So, I had moved on by that time. Mom retired 92, I think, or 93.
Okay.
Yeah, somewhere along there. I'd have to do a little calculating, but that's about that time.
Okay. But she had pretty vivid, fond memories of being in furniture.
She did. She spent a lot of that time there. She made a lot of good friends there. Of course, a lot of them are like her. They're gone now, but she built a lot of relationships there with people and made a lot of good friends. Her and Dad both. My dad did too.
So he worked in furniture as well.
He did too. Most all of his adult life.
Now, did they meet at a factory?
No. They met in the neighborhood. They lived in the same neighborhood there, Indian Grade.
What about your siblings? Did they get in furniture too?
One of my brothers worked in furniture for a short time. My other brother and my sister never. Well, my older brother maybe did for just a short time also, but none of them stayed very long.
But it was kind of always one of those jobs that was always there and always available if you needed it.
It's always there. It's just kind of always going to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think when because you were gone by this point, you start hearing about all these layoffs in furniture?
You began hearing of it, and the thing I heard is they're not coming back this time. That's the thing that was kind of, shocking, I guess, because they had went before. There'd been layoffs before forever, and they always came back. And I was surprised to hear that people were saying they're not going to come back this time, and they really didn't come back in like they ever were before in the 50s, 60s, 70s.
Because case goods, which is a lot of what people were working in, went when they went. They're still not back. Upholstery. Some of it maybe did go, but it all mostly came back. But a lot of that never left. But you had to work in a special kind of company that did a lot of upholstery, as opposed to some of those, like Kent Coffee and Broy Hill and all those that had just huge case goods work that, like you say, never came back.
Never did make it back.
Yeah. Anything else you remember about it?
I didn't enjoy it as much as Mom did, but I made some good relationships there. Unfortunately, like Mom, a lot of those guys were older and they're no longer with us. But it could be some good time. Like the pranks, there were some fun times. A lot of history there. It's really, I appreciate you doing this book because there's a lot of living went on in those factories. Not just thousands and thousands of lives revolved around them. And a lot of stories to be told, and in particular, something that really is meaningful to me. I'm the youngest of four. I kind of always thought I would be the last one in my family of origin. I thought I would be 70 years old and not 57 like I am today, but all my siblings passed away years ago, and I certainly didn't think the last two would be me and Mom. And so for almost 5 years now, it was just me and Mom. I always kind of dreaded that I've got my wife, my adult kids, and a grandson, but always kind of dreaded that the day was coming I'd be the last one. And one thing about it is all the memories of my family and my little home there on Indian Grave, they kind of rest with me now to remember or tell or forget or whatever. And as Mom, was in her last week, I knew that day was coming, and I told so many people would come by, I'm about to be the last one and I don't like it. So, but thanks to you and putting the book together here at Redhawk Publications, a little bit of Mom's story and a little bit of my story is going to live on long after I'm gone. And that's very touching to me. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, you're certainly welcome. One of the great things when you, I don't remember how we connected. If you heard about I was doing the book or how that connection was made, but I just remember you sending me an email to say my mom was in the furniture industry if you want to interview her, and I leapt at that because that was a great opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I would go see Mom every morning, and I'd listen to First Talk, Hal Rowe.
That's right.
You were doing an interview that morning, and you asked, did anybody have any stories or something about the furniture? And I immediately thought of that picture of Mom. And so, yeah, that's where I first heard of you in the book.
And she adds a lot of color to the book because so often you get into stories about the men who were forging these companies and making this stuff happen, and you don't really get very many women's perspectives from it. And so that's why when you said my mom worked in the furniture industry, I said, oh, absolutely, I'd want to talk to her because I remember what little I worked in furniture, there were a lot of women in the factories. And so you don't really hear from those, and she was the opportunity to speak for all those other women who had worked there over so many years, over a century in furniture. So she provided a great resource, a great opportunity to understand what it was like to get up every morning, go in, put in a hard day's work, learn those tasks that you don't necessarily associate with women, nailing the backs to nightstands and dressers and all that sort of stuff. I mean, that's pretty hard work, especially when you're on production like that. I mean, she was talking about from time to time needing help keeping up, especially when it was early on, but they had that communal, they would help each other in the factory. And so you don't get that perspective, that that may be something that we wouldn't understand if I didn't have Ruth Church in the book. So thank you very much for making that phone call. I appreciate that.
Well, it's my pleasure, and thank you.
And I got 2 for 1 on that because I got you as well.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for telling a little bit of mine and Mom's story. I appreciate it.
The book is called Well Crafted, The History of the Western North Carolina Furniture Industry. It should be out this spring. Hopefully you can get a copy at your leisure. You will see not only Ruth Church, but Romey Church, and a whole host of other people that I was lucky, fortunate to interview about the furniture industry. Some that are still with us, some that have passed. My condolences on your mom. And you're right. They do live on in the pages and in the images of the book, because what you'll find, I can't tell you the page number right now, but what you'll find is a very lively picture of Ruth Church in her first job at Kent Coffee.
Yeah.
So, Romey Church, thank you very much for being with me today on RedPubPod. And I only have one request. Can you say that, RedPubPod?
RedPubPod.
Ah, very good. Okay, yeah. I've had so many people mangle it, but you got it right the first time.
Right.
Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the book. I hope I've done justice to your mom and to your story and to that of all the Western North Carolina furniture industry.
I'm sure you have, Richard. I appreciate your interest.
Join us again for another edition of our Furniture History Series.
RedPubPod. RedPubPod.
RedPubPod, a podcast
RedPubPod.
from Redhawk Publications.
RedPubPod. RedPubPod.